Hey, welcome back to the Big Esports Podcast. In this episode, we have the man who leads EA's competitive gaming and esports division. Now, for anyone who's watched any of my content or knows about my history, I came up in the esports industry through Battlefield 2. The first game I ever purchased with my own money was FIFA 2000. So we had a great nostalgia trip at the start and then really went into how EA are doing esports differently to other people and how they want to help to innovate it for the future. And I'll just leave you with one thing to think of as we go into this episode. Think about The Sims as an esport. It's an interesting discussion. I learned a lot and I came away quite impressed with a lot of the way that he thinks and answers the questions. So hopefully you enjoy this episode too. Enjoy. Todd, we're live. How are you, mate?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic. So I mean, the easiest way to kick off this podcast, I guess, as with so many others, is just let us know, give us a bit of an elevator pitch about yourself, your history in gaming and business, and where you're sitting at today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been quite a journey. I actually started my career as an engineer, and then immediately abandoned that. So then I got on sort of the track of marketing, and I was outside the gaming industry for several years. But then I think I've now been in the gaming industry for, I think we're coming up on like 26 years. So quite a long time. Did an internet startup along the way because you sort of had to do that. But I came to EA in 2001. So I just finished 19 years at Electronic Arts. And I've had a lot of roles since I've come to EA. I started out based in Orlando, Florida, working on the sports products out of there, running their marketing team. And then that grew to me running the EA Sports brand and the marketing for EA Sports worldwide. That eventually led to me leading marketing, the global marketing function at EA for all of our franchises. And then about 5 years ago, I was looking for something new, and EA was deciding about making an investment in esports, and I said, that sounds pretty interesting. So that's what I've been doing for the last almost 5 years now.
Yeah, wow. It's funny. I mean, for anyone who follows the podcast and content that we do, they know that I kind of started my esports career as a top level player in Battlefield 2. And no game to this day has, given me as much, I guess, casual and competitive enjoyment as Battlefield 2. And man, that was a game that, I guess it's a lot of people think, back in my day, the games were better, et cetera, et cetera. But, I love to tell this story when I was, 17, 18 years old. I used to drive over to my mate's house, at 4:30. We'd purchase a 30-pack can of Coke and probably have half of those each throughout the night and play until, from around 4:30 till around 7:30 a.m. the next day, until like our eyes and our hands just couldn't function anymore. Go to sleep, wake up at 1 o'clock, and then kick it off again, play till 6 and then drive home.
Yeah, well, I used to do the same thing. Huge gamer. When I was doing marketing outside of the games business, I really enjoyed that type of business approach, but I didn't really enjoy the industry I was in. And I just one day looked at the stack of games that I had, next to my television and what I was doing with all my free time, and I just said, maybe I should just try to find a job in the games business. And I literally cold called all the video game companies in the Bay Area till, I found one that was willing to give me an opportunity. And that's kind of how you sometimes start. But yeah, I mean, for me, one of the reasons I came to EA is that for me, the game growing up was really Madden. North American born, and came from Oklahoma, which is a big, football, rich state. And that was just the game that we played. And so when I got an opportunity in 2001 and they said, hey, you can be the head of marketing for Madden, I was like, wow, that's like a dream come true. It's like full circle, basically. So I leapt at that opportunity, and 19 years later, it's gone through a lot of different ins and outs, but I've enjoyed really every sort of unique opportunity that I've had.
It was pretty funny. You're opening a lot of memories in my memory bank right now. The first game I ever paid my own money for was FIFA 2000.
Yeah,
So
well,
so there you go.
and for me, it was NHL. I think it was 90. It was the famous one, 93 or 94.
Yeah.
With the one timer. I mean, I played that thing to death. I mean, that was just what we all played. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a dream come true when you get the opportunity to actually, as you get to become an adult and you get an opportunity to actually help build games and you bring those to market. And now you get to do esports, and it's, you know, pretty amazing.
Mm.
It feels like a dream sometimes.
I mean, and this question is probably pretty obvious for you, but I think it will help to lead in. I mean, what does a basic marketing strategy today look like compared to what it used to, 19 years ago? Obviously, magazines pretty much non-existent, TV commercials.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, um, there was only a few levers, marketing levers that you felt like you could pull, right? There
Mm.
was essentially press magazines that would write things about you. And then there was print advertising. I remember doing, advertising for magazines. And then only on a few titles, because again, the industry was so much smaller. Only a few titles actually ever did television advertising, and that was like a big deal to do television advertising.
Mm.
So a lot of retail. What's your signage going to be at the cash register, and all those sorts of things. And just over that time period, obviously the complete move to digital as a means of communication, but also as a delivery mechanism for the games, just radically changed what a marketing organization does or has to do. And it also moved very much, back when I started, you made a game, it whatever it was when it was done is what you brought to market, and it stayed that way forever. And you sort of, it was more like a movie business where you would sort of
Mm.
build up to a launch, make the launch, and then you'd move on to the next game. Now everything is a live service. You're constantly adding to the game, you're constantly engaging, and you're having a relationship with your player base, as opposed to what I would call more of a transactional relationship. Now it's really based on a real relationship. And so
Mm.
yeah, it's night and day. And in my various capacities at EA, I've been involved in a lot of that transformation. I haven't been in marketing now for 5 years, but I know it's continued to evolve at a pretty rapid pace.
There's a lot of people in the LinkedIn chat talking about Battlefield 1942 and Battlefield 2 now. So
Well,
we've spun the nostalgia wheel.
I think, yeah, I didn't get to start working on the Battlefield series till um, Battlefield 4, which had its challenges in initial launch, but ended up being a big success. Um, the first person shooters were not my genre of choice, but I've worked on a lot of them since. I worked on Titanfall, the very first Titanfall. So a lot of really great games, and obviously Apex now. So
Yeah.
a lot of really, really cool stuff. It's fun.
And I feel like one of the other major marketing differences too, I guess, for you guys would be internal marketing with a platform like Origin. So many of the developers have their own platform these days, and you're not relying on that external retail, like you said. And I've got a bit of history in there with computer components, working for Thermaltake and Corsair, and it's so different when you control your own marketing platform. It's good and bad.
Yeah, and I think also, there's a shift to subscription now, where
Mm.
you're having a completely different relationship there. It's not about hey, buy this game, or get involved in this game. It's that longer term relationships that you're establishing with people over a long period of time. And the metrics that you do to decide what's good and bad have all changed.
Mm.
Like I said, the delivery of the product all changed. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm still in the industry, and one of the reasons I'm still at EA is because we have everything continues to change. That it's not, you don't get bored, right? I mean, I come to work every day, and especially this year, which is a craziest year probably ever. You're constantly breaking new ground, and I think that's what keeps it exciting. That's
Mm.
why I'm still doing it. If I was still doing the same job I was, or roughly the same job that I was doing when I joined, I would have left a long time ago. But I've been afforded a lot of really unique opportunities.
And it's really interesting to see so many games these days, especially esports heavy titles, go away from that seasonal release, right? It's no longer just the release before Christmas. If you look at games like Dota 2, CS:GO, League of Legends, they're all coming up on 10 plus years released, and it seems like Apex Legends and some other games are following that similar suit.
Yeah, I mean, I think those games, and I would even say even the sports games that obviously EA Sports is known for, um, the model is moving to less kind of these big, introductions and then another introduction. Said that, like I said, live services is the term, which just means the game is relevant for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Much longer. We've moved, like, for instance, The Sims, and hopefully we'll get to talk about that today. I mean, we especially around your question about what can be an esport, we turned The Sims into a competitive gaming title. That game is, I think, past its 5-year mark. In fact, I know it's past its 5-year mark, and it's as relevant as it's ever been. I think it now has 40 million people that play that game. So
Mm.
it's a different business. Consumer tastes change, and just the way we interact with the player base is very, very different and changes all the time.
And it follows a similar method to how so many companies who create software apps development kind of focus on updating their products over time. Like, I remember looking at Valve with their Dota 2 release, saying they're no longer going to every 6 months to a year releasing a massive patch where there's 7 pages of patch notes. They were going to a bi-weekly schedule where every 2 weeks they might tweak some items a little bit, maybe change a hero slightly, but then there's still every 6 months or so, and generally after the international and somewhere else in between, they're releasing something big to keep people interested. But also it enables you to test and learn, right? Like, it would suck if you spent, I just think about, imagine the anxiety of releasing like a FIFA 2000 or releasing something on the Nintendo 64 where you just can't change anything at all. And you go, damn, I hope people are going to like this. Like, we can do our studies and we can guess and we can do our focus groups. But man, if we release something that sucks, we got a whole year of pain to come before we release something else again.
Well, I've been in that role or that business many, many, many times. And yeah, it's nerve wracking. Yeah. But look, everything is all this makes it interesting. That's, bottom line for me is, I get excited about breaking new ground and doing things different. That, and so as long as, and this industry is sort of made for that. If you constantly do the same sort of things, and I don't think the consumers reward you very well.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess, going into that question that we wanted to talk about what makes a game an esport. I feel like in the past, esports titles became esports by accident. Counter-Strike 1.6, Dota 2, even Battlefield 2 when I played it. None of these games were developed at the start with esports in mind, but they just happened to become that way due to having certain factors to do with the game. I'm interested in learning from you, like, is there a special formula that makes a game an esport in your mind?
Yeah, I would never use the term formula, which makes it seem like you can just sort of crank out entertainment, and entertainment is never that easy.
Yeah.
I think there's a few lenses to look at that question, and the heart of it is, to some degree, is what, beyond just the community saying, "Hey, we like to watch people play," and many communities have done that, and it's sort of built up the need for it. I'd say Super Smash Brothers is an example of that, where the community basically just rallied around, and here's a game that hasn't really been updated for a long time, and yet the community still wants to do that. From a publisher point of view, I think you have to ask the question, and why are you doing esports in the first place? And I think there are 2 reasons. I can tell you why EA is doing them. The first is, it is a marketing vehicle for the video games, right?
Mm.
People see people playing the game, they get to know the game, they get excited about it. It drives them to maybe purchase the game or drives them back to engage in the game. And that's, that is the reason why esports was created. And that is actually the reason that the vast majority of the esports industry is based on that. And that's how they measure their success. So the question is can you build a big enough audience, and can you engage, the viewer to become a player? Or, as it is the case in most cases, we're not really trying to necessarily grow the player base. We're just trying to get them more engaged in our games. And so free to play games that, have a revenue stream that come from people playing the game more and more, that's where the birth of esports all came from. And they're still like that. Dota 2, I think, is built completely on that model. But there's a different reason also to do it, which I think there are a few of us that are publicly saying this is what we want to do as well, which is to create a media business based upon viewership. And that means treating the esport as a entertainment property unto itself that you can make money from through media rights, sponsorship, merchandising, etc. And I think that's a much smaller group of companies, publishers that are trying to do that. And so when it comes back to your question, which is what's an esport, I think it kind of gets answered based upon, well, what's your objective or what's your goal? For us, we look at it and say, okay, well, look, at the bare minimum, you need a game that, is competitive in nature, right? And it has to be, honestly, legally, it has to be competitive in nature, right? So you have to pass certain governmental rules around what is an actual competitive game. So that's at like the bare minimum. But clearly we look at things like how engaged is the community, right? Are you going to start from zero? Very few examples of where games have started from zero to create esports. Normally the game was already at a certain level of popularity beforehand. So, when I started the competitive gaming group, the first two games that I went behind was FIFA and Madden. Why? FIFA is one of the biggest games in the world, certainly the biggest game that EA has. And Madden is the biggest game, one of the biggest games in North America, and certainly the biggest game that we have in North America, on the sports side. And so that was just really based on, yes, they're competitive. Yes, they have engaged communities, and they're quite big. So, to me, that's the starting point. I'd say other things that are really important is that developing a game for play by millions of people is actually very different than developing a game that is made for viewership. And it requires a lot of changes that have to be made. And so one of the key attributes for me is you better have a dev team that actually wants this to be a success. So it's really rare. In fact, I don't think there's any real example of any really large esport game where literally it's just taking it off the shelf and playing it off the shelf. You need, in the same way that people are developing live service features inside of the games for the tens of millions, we need the same thing out of our games, for our usage. And everybody has limited resources, development resources, marketing resources, etc. So you better make sure you have a partner, internal partner I'm talking about, who really wants to realize a vision of creating a new form of entertainment based upon their game. And we've had some stop and starts as you go through that internally, but now I think we have more games for a single publisher that has real heavy esport support behind it than I believe any other publisher. We're now doing 5 franchises. So FIFA, Madden, in Asia, we have a FIFA Online 4 free-to-play game, Apex Legends, and now just a month ago, The Sims. And I think that's a pretty radical lineup for what I would say is traditional esports. And I think that's, again, part of our strategy, Chris, is that if you look at the history of esports, esports have been around since 1999. So 21 years, started in Korea. I would say that pretty much almost all of the executions around esports have played out of the same playbook. Let's mimic a traditional sports broadcast. We're going to have a play-by-play person. We're going to have color analysts. We're going to have sideline reporters. We're going to take teams. We'll interview them before. We'll let them play. We'll interview them afterwards. We'll put up stats. That's just the traditional sports broadcast. It's been primarily delivered through digital channels. They're pretty lengthy broadcasts, 6 hours, 8 hours, multiple days. They've been completely male-dominated, both by the player base and by the viewer base. And I think also, importantly, they are predominantly, almost exclusively, watched by people who play the games that they're watching. That is a big business, but it is not a mainstream business. It actually is a niche business. What EA wanted to do is see if we could take the concept of competition around video games and move it to a mass market audience. Could we do things? Yeah, we'll do the traditional sports broadcast. That's what we've been doing for 4 years. But The Sims Sparked is actually based on reality competition. It's amazing that nobody, I mean, we over the last year, as we were planning all that, we were like, man, I can't believe no one's ever done this. We got to get this to market before, other people try to do this type of stuff. Everything has been male dominated. Again, Sims Sparked is a great example of that. But we're also looking at, if you look at behavior of Gen Z audiences, they want shorter broadcast lanes. They don't want longer ones. So, how do you create a form of entertainment that's actually going to hit an untapped audience, the player base audience? You're capped. You're capped by how many people play your game. But, the best, things that really go mass, you don't have to be a player to actually be a viewer. And that's kind of where we want to get to. And that's where we've been driving towards. And over this last year, I think we've just accelerated in sort of hitting that vision.
A lot of good nuggets. I had to take some notes for some of the follow-ons responses from that. Some really, I'm glad you said a few of those things in there. Number one, that I really wanted to highlight, that you said that esports is often a loss leader, and it's a marketing in itself. And I think that's something that a lot of people endemic to the esports market don't understand. And I like to tell this story where, I left my job at Corsair and say, I'm going to be an esports consultant, and I'm going to convince people who don't know who I am to buy into an industry they don't understand, which globally is only worth $1.1 billion anyway. And without thinking that really it's gaming that drives esports. And often esports is a loss leader and a marketing vehicle, to push people into the casual game, just like you said. And using a user case, I mean, for me, it's Dota 2. I've got 3, 4, 5,000 hours of Dota 2 over the past 7 years. And I didn't want to play the game at the start because the entry level for skill is extremely high in Dota 2, which is something they're trying to fix. And it was too hard. But I watched the International 2013. It was a fantastic tournament. I was like, wow, I want to be part of this ecosystem. And I've been playing the game since then. But even for me, as someone who works in esports, I don't really embed myself at all in the esports ecosystem unless it's the international every year. But I do play the game with friends all the time. And, I think another thing you were saying as well is you don't or you shouldn't develop a game with esports in mind. And I'm sure you get messages like this all the time, and I do too. People say like, hey, Chris, I want to make an esports game. And you go, no, you want to make a game that has a low entry, a high skill ceiling, and it's good for content creators and it's good for casual people. Because, once again, esports being a $1.1 billion market, gaming being a $163 billion market, like which one do you think you're going to make the money out of? Like, I think it's going to be the game.
And also just, it is so hard to make a form of entertainment truly popular. And, think about the number of games that are released each year and how many of them truly, really get to large scale. And obviously EA is a company that deals with large scale. That's what we're trying to do. And it's really, really hard. So when I sat down and said, what should we build our esports program around? I'm going to try to put as many things to give me tailwind in this endeavor as possible. So of course, I'm going to start with the biggest games that we have. Another reason this is a question that I get asked a lot, which is, well, if you could watch, regular sports, why would you watch esports based upon a traditional sport like a FIFA or a Madden? You're right. There are trade-offs there, but what I will say is an answer I always give for that. Two points. One is the reason people watch competition of any nature is not really about the actual skill that the person or team is demonstrating. That's a part of it, but I'd say it's not the biggest part of it. The biggest part of it is an emotional attachment that people have to the competitors themselves or the teams, right? Why is college football in America so popular? Well, it's because people, like literally generations, pass down their love of, I grew up in Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma football. Same thing with European football, club football, same sort of dynamic. And the same thing as it comes to, when there's a storyline that's interesting, a team going for a championship, a team avoiding, being relegated, somebody going for a record, two clubs that have a rivalry that don't like each other. That's really the motivation for watching. And so that's why you can see, like, whether it be things like the Great British Baking Show, or whether it be American Idol or Survivor, those are all competitions. I don't think people watch it for baking or for singing. They watch it for the drama. So for me, our role, and I think this is true of any form of entertainment, is got to be entertaining. So if you are, I think people will watch regardless of whether they're actually going to play or not. And again, for a North American audience, I'd say look at the Super Bowl, NFL Super Bowl. What percentage of the people that watch the Super Bowl have ever put on pads and played tackle football? Like 1%, 2%, something like that. So how do you get there? So part of it, I think, is focusing in on the stories, the people. It's going to start with the core, because the core is going to be most interested in the game. But to really get it to a bigger level, you're going to have to, sort of tug at the heart, not just at sort of the intellect and the brain portion of it. The other thing I say about traditional sports games is that, again, I always think of things as, is the business I'm entering into a headwind or a tailwind? And some of the tailwinds that I get is, well, I get FIFA as an organization. I get the English Premier League. I get the NFL. I get the New England Patriots. These are huge organizations that have huge fans, that have huge affinity. And by utilizing their brands and their partnership, we actually can push things further along. And so when I look at a game, whatever it is, Call of Duty, Overwatch, Riot, those are predominantly just the publisher. There are other players, but the predominant push is having to be funded and driven by the publisher. What I like about our sports titles in particular is I got a lot of other really, really valuable and important partners that can push along, because that's really what it takes. I mean, if you're trying to really make a sustainable business as opposed to just a marketing or for a fun thing, which is where the industry started, then you're going to need as many people with aligned interests pushing all in the same direction.
There's some interesting chat for you as well about the headwind, tailwind. Are you a fan of aviation, or is that just a statement that you use?
I don't know. I'm kind of a metaphor person, so I always think of things in sort of those sorts of terms. Yeah, I mean, look, every business has headwinds and tailwinds, and obviously you try to get as many things behind your sales as you possibly can. Yeah,
that's true. So much of what you're talking about has been kind of affirming or going along the same lines with a lot of my research. So I'm a fairly recent fan of the UFC, and MMA as a whole. I do a bit of jiu-jitsu myself. Obviously can't at the moment. It's 100% contact sport and we're in coronavirus. So it's the worst time to be wanting to learn jiu-jitsu than anything else. But, I think that esports and gaming can learn so many things from the way that UFC does it, which is about focusing on the journeys of the fighters. Let's say, there's a big fight on this weekend and there's multiple episodes of UFC embedded where they will go to the top fighters and they will follow them throughout the whole week, asking them how their training camp's going, asking them how their diet's going, how are they feeling mentally, how are they doing with media and the fans and their weight cut. You don't see that in esports. As well as I think the culmination of telling the story up to one big event and then they move on to the next, I think is important too. Because I think you can lose the story. If you're doing a 16-week regular play with 8 to 30 plus teams, you can kind of forget the story of what people are going through in the day to day. But when they're going up to that single fight, you're following that journey to like a big crescendo at the end. And the other thing you were saying too about the limited amount of time, a UFC fight is three rounds of 5 minutes or 5 of 5 minutes if it's a main event. So once again, that's short. So if there is one particular person you want to watch or just a few fights, you've only got to tune in for an hour, 2 hours, and you get all of that media and attention coming to an end in one go.
Yeah, and what we see is a lot of consumption by millennials and Gen Z or mobile. So you're watching on a small screen for 10 or 15 minutes at a time. Like, what does that content need to be? And what does that competition need to be? So we're ideating now around ideas that like the entire competition could be done in 15 minutes. Like, what does that look like? And how do you bring that to people in unique ways? So I think, again, I look at the industry esports as I'm not being critical. I'm just saying that the industry has been basically playing out of one playbook, and it's a good playbook. Don't get me wrong. We do plenty out of that playbook as well. But there is a bigger opportunity, and it's tough because you can't abandon the core community for your games, and you have to satiate their needs and their desires. That's first and foremost. Sure, but can you expand that and bring in a new audience? And you use the example UFC. The one I always use is the Olympics. Every 4 years, somehow they get tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people to watch rhythmic dancing or gymnastics, to watch curling, to watch all these sports that nobody really cares about. And the way they do that is they lean into national pride, and they lean into the teams and the players themselves, and they create a story. And somebody told this to me really early on, which is sports is about stories. And I believe that esports is the same thing. So when I get down to why should I watch esport versus a sport, the question is who's got the more interesting story, not do I want to watch video games or do I want to watch, a bunch of people throw a round object into a cylinder. I mean, it's just as absurd that somehow that is legitimate, but playing Apex Legends is somehow not as legitimate. They're both honestly equally absurd or equally not absurd. What it's really about is people who are controlling what's going on. That's the interesting part.
It's such a good point you said about the Olympics. I was thinking about this the other day. I don't know why, but javelin just came into my mind out of nowhere. And then I was thinking, people go nuts for that. They fill out stadiums. But besides the Olympics, when do they ever care? Unless you're Usain Bolt, unless you're Michael Phelps, how many famous people are actually developed from the Olympics? That
and they're not. And that's I mean, normally they're not. That they are somewhat transitory, but obviously hugely valuable entertainment property that has been built over a long period of time. So I think there's lessons to be learned. I think that esports was built out of what I'll call super fans of specific games. People, I mean, look, I did it too growing up. I mean, you were talking about your history. Hey, I used to have my friends over and we used to play and compete against each other. It's just taking that to a larger scale. That's where it started. Yeah. Where it's going now, and you just saw the announcement a couple days ago of the deputy commissioner from the MLB coming out to Overwatch. I mean, that's a sign, whether you agree with that decision or not, it's a sign that this is no longer a marketing only type of endeavor. It no longer is a small sort of fan-based, sort of gamer-oriented. This is now a statement, um, that people are really trying to make a sustainable business here. And, we are obviously, to make a sustainable business, you have to make something that brings joy to people to watch and to engage in. So
Yeah.
those two things are not counter to each other. In fact, making a great esport that people love to want to watch and a game that people want to play, that's the way you get a good business. But it's a realization that I think the industry is just maturing.
And one of the other questions that I always like to ask as well is who why who are the people watching for? So an example is like I went to the Blizzard Overwatch World Cup Sydney, and it was like Team Australia, Team Finland. There are a few other countries there too, and it was a sold out. It was sold out in Sydney. It was around 2,000 tickets every morning. The line for the Blizzard store had to be cut off, and it would be sold out before the end of the line would get there. So people were going mad over that. And while the crowd was having a fantastic time, and it was a sold out arena, everyone was enjoying the games, and Australia was playing very well. I think we won that tournament. What I noticed was that the players, the Australian players who were literally just getting, fanboyed over on stage, 30 minutes later could walk through the crowd and be completely unnoticed. And to me, that showed that they only cared about the fact that they are from Australia, so they have that national pride, and they're playing the game that they enjoy better than them, but they don't really care about the players whatsoever. And I thought that was an interesting, chance for Blizzard to look at that and maybe say, maybe we should develop these players a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that maybe a good way to think of this is that there is no one single answer as to why people watch, because people watch for different reasons. So now in the current marketplace, the predominant viewer is a player of the specific game they're watching. So what they're most interested in, I think, is watching the game that they love played at a really high level and trying, I think, in a way to get better at the game themselves. I think that's probably the starting point. I think it evolves to, so the way I would describe that is more of an intellectual, a head-oriented decision. A more emotional decision, a heart-oriented decision is, wow, I actually like this team, or I like these players, or I'm rooting for a country. Sort of these other sort of what I call heart-led sort of reasons. And so, but there's also people that are coming in, and especially what we've seen over this last 6 months, is certain channels, especially as we move off of digital. So EA has been very successful at breaking through in television, linear distribution, which is where you can reach a lot of people very, very quickly. But it's a very different type of audience. So now they're looking for, they don't even play the game. They might not even play video games, but they're coming into it kind of like some of the examples you and I were given before, which is they're interested in the competition. They're interested in the people. So I think, again, it's evolving, and I don't want to be misunderstood here. There's different competitions for different audiences, and we would never think that there should be one size fits all. So when you look at, let's say, our portfolio of the 5 titles, we have actually said, look, we need to think of things in kind of tiers. One of the tiers is authentic esports competition played out of the typical traditional sports sort of playbook. Then we want to look at, okay, what does it look like when we bring in people who maybe are famous for things other than playing video games and map them with professional players, and we do a competition? And then what does it look like at an even a higher level where it's not really so much about the authentic esports type of classic play, but it's more of a for fun competition, which maybe is very heavily driven by these celebrity or well-known folks. Because again, each of those tiers is sort of targeted at a different person. And if you're going to go mainstream, you kind of need to have all of that in your portfolio. So what you'll see, I think, from EA over the next, actually starting this fall, you'll start to see that we're going to be doing more variety of competitions and not be satisfied with just a single way of doing competitions. because I think it's a broad market out there, and there's a lot of different ways to sort of build content for various audiences.
Mm. And yeah, I've been working with a few different, consulting with a few different parties, talking about so many of the things that you've just discussed, which is great. I'm glad we're so much on the same page there about those different models. And I hate to use, I guess, the UFC too much, or again and again as an example, but I just think that they are something that esports needs to look at more and more. With and a lot of what you were saying is, why are people watching? And part of my question is, why are people watching? Are they watching for the game? Are they watching for the story? Are they watching for the people who are playing? Are they watching for the teams? As in, are they watching because it's Cloud9? Are they watching because it's Sneaky that plays in the League of Legends team? Or are they watching because it's League of Legends? Or are they watching for another reason?
And my answer to you is that it's different for different people. I think all of those are actual factors, but which ones are the dominant ones, I think, are different for different people. So,
yeah.
If I put on a broadcast on ESPN, I'm going to get definitely a more slant towards the people that are coming in for the players and the competition and the people. If I put it on Twitch, and I do a 8-hour broadcast, I can tell you it's going to be primarily a player, a player audience that is looking to, that loves the game and is trying to learn how to play the games. We have a mantra around our broadcast team, which is deliver 3 things in every broadcast. And it's sort of designed around thinking about the various audiences. First, teach the game, because people are coming to learn how to play the game and get better. Second is reveal personalities. That can be player personalities, that can be broadcaster personalities. The things that really make people lean forward are entertaining people. And the third one is surprise the audience, because we have a glut of content in the world right now. And if you're not going to do something that people haven't seen before, I think people get bored pretty quickly. So can we achieve all those 3 things every time we put on an event or a broadcast? No, we probably don't, but I can tell you at least that's kind of our mantra. I even made a sign up that I put up in the broadcast studio just to remind our teams, like, come back to one of those 3 things and try to drive that.
And I think, just like you were saying, to back that up, a lot of the real money and real growth comes out from telling that story and bringing in a more casual audience. And once again, the example I was going to use with the UFC is there's 2 major points in their growth period. Number one is their reality TV show, The Ultimate Fighter, which was able to tell the stories. So it was no longer you had to be a hardcore fan of kickboxing or Muay Thai or wrestling to be a fan of it. You could tell the story and you could follow these people and follow their journey. And a lot of those people from The Ultimate Fighter did become champions, like Robert Whittaker, Australian MMA middleweight, and, Josh Koscheck and various others in there. And the second one was having someone who's almost bigger than the sport, which is Conor McGregor. Yeah. Who's able to bring in all of those casual fans now. So you're able to have people watching it just because he's a larger than life phenomenon. And, I feel like,
or was it, I'm trying to remember her name, Ronda Rousey, is that her
Ronda
name?
Rousey, yep.
Yeah, I mean, that was another big, I worked and was in charge of EA Sports marketing when we did our first deal with the UFC. So I've deep in the UFC, I brought to market at least 2 versions of that. And I've met many, many times, sat down at the table with Dana White, and I get that. In fact, we are, I shamelessly look and steal from entertainment around us all the time. So we do look at the UFC. We look at the NBA, really progressive. We look at the NFL. We look at all the, the European leagues. But we also look at other forms of entertainment. I mean, I'm a gigantic reality competition nut, so I watch, whether it's The Voice or whether it's Survivor or whether it's literally the British Bake Off. I've watched all of those shows and many more. And there's so many things to be learned about why do people watch, and we're still clearly learning. But as an industry, again, we have to stay true to the communities that are currently watching, and we have to stay true to what they want, but we also can open it up, and you just have to be careful about how you broaden out. and you can't at any point sort of lose the passionate fans, the core fans who are watching for, what I call is the traditional esports experience. So we don't want to just sort of like change overnight. We want to evolve and we want to see where we can go. But my goal is to, bring more entertainment to what we're doing. And, think, our teams are very much thinking of how do we build a business that is sustainable unto itself. It's not relying on the marketing value that we bring to the company. I would say that at this point, there's nobody in the industry that has been able to build a profitable model based upon non-game related revenue sources. But people are getting close, and I think hopefully, all of us will get there, and we'll really have created a new form of entertainment that, maybe 10 years from now, people look around and go, yeah, that's just what everybody watches, and it does become the mainstream sort of thing. So I think that's where it can go, and obviously that's kind of why I'm doing it, because I think it can go, and I want to be part of that journey.
It's I guess so much what we're talking about really is functioning as a media business, right? There was a cool quote I saw. I can't remember where it was, but it was something like, within 10 years, every company will function as a media company. And even for us here at Big Esports, we do a lot of, actually I released a video just before our call about that exact MLB and Overwatch commissioner thing. And, it's a massive line of incoming business revenue for us as people watching our content, engaging with it, saying, okay, I think Chris knows what he's talking about. Let's have a chat. You look at things like the UFC, for example, and their broadcast rights. You look at the NFL and their serious amount of broadcast rights, where they could not only just sell their main product, but they can sell a Tuesday show about their product on one channel and a Thursday show about their product on another, both for, $1 billion plus, billion with a B. So, looking at that media, and then also looking at FaZe Clan, for example, they are an esports team, but essentially they function as a media company, and hell, they're releasing a full feature length film coming out soon too. So I think that's,
to me, it's maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I've always thought, first of all, understand who your viewer is or who your viewer could be. Understand why they want to watch. Give them something that meets and exceeds their expectations around that. That will get you a large viewership audience. And when you get a large viewership audience throughout centuries of humankind, people have been able to figure out a way to monetize that, right? So it's key is really, it's no different than building a game. We used to spend a lot of time, obviously, what do gamers want to play? What are the features? What are those? How do they want to interact? The better you understand that, and the better you're able to deliver on that, that's how a product becomes a battlefield, where it's, one of these mega titles that everybody, a lot of people, at least in the world, seem to want to play. That's what we're trying to do as well. But I think that because it was birthed, esports was birthed in the way that it was out of that marketing organization. And for the most part, even like I said, Dota 2 is a marketing vehicle. There's only a few players that sort of have this vision. And it takes a while to build that. I mean, if you want to go back and look at the length that it takes to have a new form of sports entertainment become meaningful and powerful, I mean, it's measured in decades typically. If you want to think about the NBA or the NFL or, European football, UFC, these are all, these are not overnight types of things. These take a while to get ingrained into the culture, to build over time, and to evolve into something that hopefully, can satisfy the entertainment needs of many millions.
So I'd love to get some of your thoughts on, I guess, internal versus external management. So like a really obvious example is that, Valve, besides the international, do basically nothing internal as far as CSGO and Dota 2 goes. Sure that they might back end fund some tournaments, but ultimately it's 99% external. Compared to, say, Riot Games, which has a very similar game, League of Legends, which is 100% the opposite. They're contracting everything from the tournaments to the commentators are often on full-time salaries. So I'd love to get your view on that. Like, a lot of EA stuff seems to be going to quite internal. Do you see that that's the future for you?
Actually, I would tell you that we're not more internal. We're actually fairly balanced. The answer that I would give you is, it goes back to, why are you doing esports? So if you are Dota 2 and your goal is to have this build as a marketing tool to come into your game, well, if you already own the game, that's your revenue source. Why would you go ahead and spend the money when other people are willing to go do that for you? So I think there's a motivation there where they don't really necessarily want to take on the investment that it takes. I mean, hiring a bunch of people, building studios, doing everything that you need to do is a big endeavor. And some companies want to take that on and others don't. I think the ones that are willing to take it on are the ones that are saying, we're going to be in this for decades. Right? This is not a short-term thing, right? You're building for the long term. When you build for the long term, then you can take an investment like a studio or like broadcast or talent, and you can amortize that over a longer period of time. So I think it just depends on, are you doing this as a marketing investment to drive in-game revenue primarily, or are you primarily trying to also build out a standalone business? And I think that can explain a lot of the differences. For EA, I look at it again as headwinds and tailwinds. So I would like as many people blowing into my sailboat as I possibly can. And if you look at, let's say, the popularity of the NBA, did the NBA and the NBA franchises, are they the only ones that have been pushing basketball? No. Nike and all the companies that make all the gear, they push on it. The broadcasters, they push on it. The sponsors, they push on it. Everybody is investing to try to move forward. So I've never, ever felt that any one single company could ever make the investment that it would take for something to really get to that scale. You're going to need multiple partners who, again, have a shared strategic vision, the wherewithal, because it does take time, to make an investment over a long period of time to grow something. And so I look at that and say, yeah, I want more third parties that want to choose to invest. And what is up to us when we license out the rights to allow people to do it, we have to construct it in a way that those companies can make money, or else once they've gone through their venture capital money, they'll have, they'll be out of business. So, we have to build something for the long term. And again, that's something that maybe my background at EA, EA, I think at this point, if it's not the oldest company in the industry, it's one of them. I think it was founded in 1982. And EA Sports, which I had, the honor of managing that brand for many, many years. I always used to think in timelines of decades, make decisions about what's happening a decade, in the same way that you're recounting an experience that you had with EA Sports from 2000, I think you said. So we're now 2 decades away. If you make a lot of decisions that are based on what I just need next quarter, I don't think you end up with that same type of relationship. So I've always felt long-term, and long-term, we want to make it so we can get other people to invest their money. We can give them an opportunity to make a return, and their partnership with us, if we're aligned strategically, will help us grow to the benefit of the competitors and the benefit of the community and the benefit of people that are viewing.
That's some good answers. I'd like to talk as well about crowdfunding in esports. It's something that It's something that brings a lot of media attention, especially through the Dota 2 International. So for those people listening that don't know, Dota 2 is a MOBA game, and every year they've got a large tournament called the International. The publisher / developer Valve will put up a certain amount of prize pool themselves, which is around $1 million, $1.6 million, and then the rest will be crowdfunded by the community. And that crowdfunding happens by purchasing in-game items through a compendium and extra points and etc. for cosmetics. And 25% of all money spent on those cosmetics will go directly to the prize pool, and 75% will sit with Valve. So for last year, it was around a $35 million prize pool. For this year, because the international's been delayed, but still they've hit over that amount already. I'd love to learn a bit more about EA's thinking around crowdfunding and such. It seems like a fantastic way to get some significant buy-in. That once again, it's not just about the player supporting the esport, but they're also getting some in-game stuff to play casually too.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting model, and one that we've certainly looked at. We haven't yet executed on that, but that doesn't mean that we won't in the future. To me, it's another interesting, unique way to connect your community, into the gaming experience and the game itself. And so we've done some similar, not exactly what you're talking about, but just other ways of connecting the community. So for instance, our esports players, some of the top professionals, we've put them as playable coaches on the sidelines of Madden, and made those available, to the regular player base as part of our Madden Ultimate team. We've inserted, the teams that play in our FIFA ecosystem, those organizations into their game, elevating sort of those brands, and kind of going full circle with the community for their love of those teams, and getting to experience that inside of the game itself. So, as for crowdfunding, I think it's been great, and it has, to me, I would just call it another tailwind. That's in that way, it's actually the community that's helping you, because there's absolutely no doubt that more prize money brings in more attention. It brings players into your ecosystem that want to go for that. It brings media attention. It certainly has a marketing value to it. All those reasons make it a really effective, partnership with, in this case, with the community.
So going back to, I guess, like one of the first questions we talked about as well is like, how are you determining internally what games to focus on as an esport? You mentioned your 5, but I don't think you mentioned, UFC, which we talked about a bit. There's a new title coming out, and also Battlefield, which has been out for a while as well. Like, is there a particular reason you don't focus on those and focus on others?
I think, again, a couple different things. One is I'll just take a step back and just say, we're already invested in 5 franchises. I'm not aware of any other publisher that has anywhere really close to that in terms of major investments. So if anything, I'd rather go deeper on those than probably necessarily add more. Why certain franchises versus others? Again, I go back to the original question. Is it a game that can be built for competition? Is there a development team that is willing to make the commitment in their resources to build what's needed? Is there a large community that will embrace this? Is there interest in in the product to the broader audience? One of the things that we haven't talked about is our focus at EA on building esports around accessible games. So if you have this vision of getting to a mass market entertainment, you want to have a game that's accessible. And accessibility comes from both the game itself, but also, for instance, the connection to real world. Right now, if you are Call of Duty, there is no real world equivalency of that. If you're League of Legends, there's no real world equivalency of that, which means it requires a lot on the viewer to understand, to make sense of it. You think about a game like The Sims or FIFA or Madden or FIFA Online 4, and even Apex, which is more core, but I'd say on the spectrum of most shooters, it's probably more understandable. Um, not having to get over that understandable barrier, being more accessible is really important to us, because again, I've been in the industry, like I said, 25 plus years. You know, I don't play Dota 2. I don't play League of Legends. I can't really follow those competitions, but you've got I think somewhere close to 4 billion people around the world that call themselves a football / soccer fan. They already understand the rules. They already understand the players. They already understand the teams. That's a lot of stuff you don't have to explain to people. So anyway, going back is, we look at those things. We look at the available market size. 4 billion people who follow football is a pretty impressive number. That's why that was my first choice. Plus, it also ticked off all those other reasons. But then you just have to have the long-term commitment. Apex was probably the most, risky in that, we started working with that team before that game even launched, not even knowing if there would be an audience for that game. Now, as it turned out, there's a huge audience for that game, and we thought that there would be, but there was no assurances that there would be. And so, that's part of it as well, is just, like I said, you better be committed for a long period of time. You talked about some of the games that are most popular. They've been around for a long period of time. So you have to have a publisher, and you have to have other people in the ecosystem wanting to keep on pushing that forward. And, we hear that a lot. Some, people say, well, one of the reasons why I'm interested in, let's say, making an investment in FIFA esports, well, I can guarantee FIFA is going to be at the top of the charts every year, and that it's going to be understood and by football fans, billions of football fans every year, because you guys have been doing it for, I think we're now past 30 years of FIFA. And that's a business reason. It takes away a lot of risk for people to get involved, whether that's sponsors or media partners or whoever it is.
Pretty an in-depth answer again, which is good. I'm glad you take the time to walk through. I can see your thinking methodology as you answer those questions. I can almost see the dot points that have been checked off.
I mean, look, if you wanted to enter into an esport, would you, what is more risky for you? A new game that is uncertain what its future is, or a game that's been around for 30 years?
Yeah.
And that's not the only factor. There's other factors, clearly, but I'm just saying that is one that I hear a lot on is, again, this is the difference between just playing, creating an esport just to have fun as a viewer versus a business, which is, why do people invest their time and their energy, and what does it actually take to get a viable business? Because if these things aren't viable, then they go away. And there are plenty of examples of, sports leagues that have come and gone because they couldn't get and make a viable business. And, we're very focused on making sure that we can create a viable business.
So we haven't got you for much longer, but I guess the last question I really want to ask is, how do you make The Sims an esport?
So this is a really a great story, I think, is that, talk about a product that products that sometimes don't work. I had hired a team to go do esports for Command and Conquer, which was a mobile game. When I set out, I said I want to do sort of four main focuses, or three main focuses. Sorry. I want to invest in sports because it's at the heart of who EA is. It's also the heart of what my passion is and my history of the company. I wanted to make an investment in something that was a unlicensed property, that was a game that would have a wide base. That became Apex. And I wanted to make an investment in mobile because I felt like if you think about the size of audiences, that's the biggest audience size. So we invested in Command and Conquer and built a program, actually did one event, and the game just didn't build an audience. And at a certain point, you kind of realize, like I said, you need to have a viable game to build on, and we just didn't have it. So
Yeah.
we took that team and we said, why don't you look at the rest of the portfolio of EA and don't self-censor yourself, and think out of the box. And the team talked to a lot of groups, and they came to me and said, kind of some of the narrative I've been talking about with you today. Why is it that every competition is always two teams fighting against each other, in a traditional sports sort of way?
Mm.
And they said, we're inspired by reality competitions. And as soon as they said it, I said, wow, that's like breaking out of the box. And then when we said, well, who's the primary audience of The Sims? Oh, it's like 50-50 male, female. Wow. The whole industry has been told it's male dominated type of industry. Oh, we could break that barrier as well. Oh, we're trying to break into an accessible game. What's more accessible than the game of life? Everybody is alive. They understand what it's like to live life.
Right.
So it's pretty darn. That's by far the most successful game that I think has maybe ever been created. And we said, look, we've got an idea here, and I can tell you that every time we presented it internally for the first time, there was always like a huh. And by the end of the presentation, people said, oh, I think I get it. And I was really happy. This first go around, it was on TBS. The first 3 episodes, averaged about 750,000 viewers a piece. That's a good number for television. It's a really good number. And the audience skewed heavily towards female, which was what we were trying to do. And I know the traditional esports industry would say, well, who cares? Because that's kind of what the gaming industry says about The Sims. Meanwhile, The Sims is hugely popular. It's a good business. There's 40 million people playing it. So, that's an example of, rather than just fish in a pond that everybody else is fishing in and trying to grab a little slice of something that everybody's trying to go for, maybe just move over to a different pond and have it all to yourself. And so whether that's a TV audience that most people have ignored, whether that's a female audience that people have ignored, there is more to the potential of esports than shooter games, strategy games, hardcore games, long broadcast times, male-dominated viewership. I'm not saying that any of those things are negative, because they're not. We're doing plenty of those things. I'm just saying that's not the only thing that you can do. So with The Sims, I think we showed that we can do something, and there is an audience, a quite large audience for it. I can tell you that all of our broadcast partners are eager for us to do more. Our biggest challenge right now is, how do you produce that type of content in a COVID world? But we're working on it. So you may see some even more innovative things that you haven't seen in this industry yet, really as a result of trying to figure out how you can do things in an isolated, world that we're now all living in.
I think it's an interesting concept. It's something I've been talking to some other people about and doing a lot of research into that too. So hopefully we see some more, whether that's from the people I'm working with or someone else in that similar vein. And I think, I think there's a fantastic spot for even more, you could say even more competitive versions of that in more traditional esports, where it's less, I think the audience would be interested if it's not too game showy, because I think we've seen different reality shows before where a player is asked to play a MOBA and an RTS and an FPS to decide who the ultimate gamer is or something like that. And it's not, a lot of the time those shows don't perform that well because it's just not realistic. And it seems more like this is what an executive thinks that a gamer wants. But gamers are often, playing one game and they want to get invested in something becoming better. And I guess using that UFC example, they did a reality show, but that was all about one sport, which is MMA, becoming better and becoming a champion at the end of it. And I think there's a wide scope here for that general reality concept as a whole.
Again, I not every idea is going to work and not every idea is executed well. I learned long ago that if you get out of touch with your community, that's a really bad place to be. So the good news is that the people that are driving this business, one, I think almost all of us are pretty big gamers ourselves. That's where you get the best work, is when you get people that are really passionate about the games that they're working on.
Yeah.
But beyond it, it's also having the ability to say, we better listen. I tell, you've heard this before, but God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, which is, you should listen more than what you say. So we tend to try to listen, pretty frequently, and we try things and then we see how it goes. So will there be some things that fall flat? Yeah, I'm sure. If we're not innovating, then if everything was successful in some sort of traditional way, then it probably means we're not pushing the envelope. We need to push into new ways. So that's a big focus for us to go do, and make sure though that we're not leaving anybody behind in our attempt to make this even into a bigger thing.
Yeah, for sure. So if someone wants to follow you or any of the work that you're doing online, where can they do so?
Where can I do so? You can follow me obviously on social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Although I'm not a huge social media guy, I get around in the normal sense. I do a lot of interviews. We put out a lot of content out of EA, and so you can certainly keep up to date on what we're doing, and hopefully the people that are here and others that are going to be watching will enjoy some of the content that we're putting out.
Yeah, fantastic, man. I really enjoyed this conversation today. It's good to see that, you're taking that well thought out look at it and, thinking about things differently than most, not necessarily focusing on that traditional esports tournament concept and thinking, how can you innovate to become bigger for the future? Because it's obvious that, esports is growing, it's exciting, it's entertaining, but once again, if you just look at the vanity metrics of the raw numbers, it's a $1.1 billion industry. So it's hard to focus on that, if you want to make some serious money and get some growth. So we need these kind of different ways of thinking, I guess.
Yeah, and again, and I agree with you. But again, a lot of the concepts that I'm talking about can be applied to traditional esports, right? I mean, we can make our stuff much more entertaining. For those that watch, I'm trying to remember what it's called, NBA. It's the halftime show on TNT here in America for NBA. I think it's called Game Time. It's Shaquille O'Neal, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley, engaging in very traditional sports in a very traditional sports sort of way, but with a lot of entertainment value to it. And I think, that's a high watermark for me. I'll watch that show, even if I'm not even that interested in the game. But it's the game that they're talking about is absolutely would be the equivalent of your traditional esports type of execution. So when we do our traditional esports, and don't get me wrong, we're doing a lot of it. It's still the majority of what we are doing. We're going to try to bring more of that entertainment value into it. Again, I think whether you are a core gamer or whether you're not, I think that is going to appeal to you if you get it right.
Yeah, and I think if anyone else is listening to this, and wondering, are there any esports organizations or tournaments that are doing a lot of focus on media? I'd suggest, if anyone wants to do extra research, looking up Blast Pro Series, as well as doing a lot of, various challenges with Counter-Strike players. And they had, I think they had FIFA players versus Counter-Strike players in various challenges and things like that too. They've got a very extensive library of different types of videos to try to humanize the players a bit more, tell those stories and get that buy-in from the fans, which is extremely important going forward.
If you're going to need to do something, if you're going to get me to watch curling. So, but you do it as NBC does it here in America every 4 years and gets me to do it. So
yeah,
it seems to work. Again, there's so many. Esports is unique unto itself. It has a different history. It has a different sort of growth, but we should never be so obstinate to say, oh, what has worked in traditional sports, what has worked in traditional broadcast. There's so many lessons to be learned from other businesses, and that's why, I've hired, my head of commercials from the PGA Tour, long-term veteran of that. It doesn't bother me that golf is a different demographic. It's just, what does it take to get to that larger audience? And that's the thinking behind Activision Blizzard and bringing Tony over from the MLB. It's not because of baseball. It's because of media and broadcast and content creation and sponsors, and how do you grow all of that at a truly large scale? And that's really what it's about. So that blend of borrowing from other parts of industries in the world, as well as taking what is unique to esports and melding that together, to me, that's kind of the recipe that at least we're trying to do.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've had you for a lot of time now. I know you're a busy man, but thanks again for coming on. It was a really good chat. I enjoyed it.
And I want to thank the person that said that my beard is impressive. So this is
that's Clinton Sparks. Yep, always the man for the conference.
Yeah, this is my COVID quarantine beard, and we'll see if it still is there after we're all released from this. But yeah, we're all making do. Anyway, thank you, Chris. Thanks for everybody for listening in. Really appreciate the time.
No worries at all. Thanks, Todd. And thanks to everyone who's listening in, whether you're live on LinkedIn, watching the replay on YouTube, or listening to the audio-only version of the podcast. We've got more episodes like this coming out every week, and we've got a lot more content functioning through our Twitter, at BigEsports_GG, Facebook, as well as my LinkedIn profile, which is /Smithy Mayo. So make sure you check it out and let us know what you'd like to learn about and what you'd like to hear. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.